The acrid smell of the house fire clung to my hair the day she swaggered into my courtroom like she owned the place. I was Judge Miriam Blackwood, black robe, gavel on the bench, staring at Brin Ashworth Sterling, the woman who just burned down my home. The nerve of her made my jaw set, but Brin didn't understand who she'd picked a fight with. Torch a judge's house, and you're asking for a legal reckoning. And I was about to serve it up cold, methodically, with federal charges on the side. 6 months before my home became a crime scene, I was a broken woman and a beloved craftsman in Pinewood Estates. I'd just buried Harold after his long fight with cancer. Our 1940s house felt like a shrine to everything we'd been. Pinewood had changed. Modest houses were being replaced with glass-fronted McMansions, and a new kind of resident arrived. Entitled, polished, and determined to remake the neighborhood. Leading that charge was Brin Ashworth Sterling, 45, Tesla, heir of superiority, and the new HOA queen determined to elevate Pinewood, by which she meant push out the old-timers. Our first clash happened while I was erecting the privacy fence Harold and I had planned. I was kneeling in the dirt among his roses when Brin arrived. Tape measure like a weapon, her tone colder than condolence. "You must be the widow." She measured my fence theatrically and declared it a violation. $500 fine, removal order, though there was no such regulation. I'd had the fence surveyed to be exactly 6 feet. This wasn't about bylaws. It was personal. A few months earlier, I'd ruled against Sterling Premium Builders for contractor fraud. This fence smacked of retaliation. Brin's small war tactics escalated into systematic harassment. Certified letters piled up, unapproved memorial stone, mailbox color violations, excessive bird feeding. Each demand came with fines and threats. As a judge and a student of HOA law, I saw every procedural flaw. Missing adopted bylaws, no hearings, unreasonable penalties. So I did what judges do. I prepared. I documented everything, filed complaints with the State Real Estate Commission, photographed my property, and logged every bogus notice. Then things got stranger. Security footage captured Brin and her entourage manufacturing violations. Designer, trainer, clipboards, staging my roses as an offense. It was a fraud ring in miniature, and it wasn't isolated. Walt Henderson, a lifelong resident, told me stories. Families harassed into moving, religious statues declared non-conforming, single mothers fined out of their homes. The pattern was clear. Brin used the HOA to squeeze out anyone who didn't fit her vision. Her harassment went criminal when she began trespassing. While I was in court, she strutted through my backyard, peering through windows, then left my back gate intentionally unsecured. That night, my beloved cat, Gavl, Harold's last gift and my companion, vanished. After a frantic search and an $800 emergency operation, the vet reported broken ribs and trauma consistent with being chased by machinery. My cameras showed landscapers with industrial blowers driving Gavl away. He fell into a storm drain and was nearly killed. This crossed from nuisance into felony territory. Animal cruelty, unlawful entry, conspiracy. I changed locks, filed criminal charges, and contacted Channel 7's Sarah Morgan. Her investigative piece exposed Brin's campaign, fabricated violations, the attack on Gavl, a pattern of targeted harassment. The community rallied, donations, pro bono law firms, calls to the Colorado Attorney General. More victims came forward, revealing a broader operation. Elderly residents, minority families, people on fixed incomes all pressured and fined into submission. Then an extraordinary turn. Patricia Pat Donnelly, who looked like a retired librarian but was a 25-year FBI veteran, walked into my kitchen with evidence that reframed everything. Pat had been surveilling Brin for financial crimes. Her files showed repeated suspicious insurance claims, shell companies, and false identities. Brin's household had been inflating property values and staging disasters for payouts. Her HOA presidency was the smokescreen while she siphoned association funds and orchestrated insurance scams. Bank statements showed hundreds of thousands missing from the HOA emergency account. She'd even filed applications under false names, mail and wire fraud. When investigators subpoenaed Brin's emails, the plan became chillingly explicit. Notes about clearing properties, pushing rezoning, and fire risk documentation drafted to justify claims. That's when the feds opened an investigation, Operation Ashfall. For 2 months, I played widow and wronged neighbor in public while behind the scenes, federal agents audited every invoice, recorded meetings, and traced money through shell LLCs across state lines. Miles Sterling, Brin's husband, and several dissolved companies connected to past suspicious fires showed up in the forensic trail. Walt Henderson wore a recorder and trapped Brin boasting about the next payout and taunting me on tape. Arrest day was a clear Colorado morning. I watched from my porch as SUVs rolled into Pinewood Estates and agents took Brin into custody in her driveway, smoothie cup abandoned on the pavement. The lead agent read charges: mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit arson, RICO violations. Watching her realize her suburban empire had crumbled was surreal, vindication mixed with a hollow aftertaste. I wasn't celebrating the misery of a neighbor. I was ensuring justice for my community and protecting the integrity of the law I'd spent my life upholding. Brin's attempt to weaponize the courts against me came next. A complaint to the Judicial Discipline Commission. Falsified evidence, doctored photos, and smear campaigns fed to partisan blogs. For a brief, brutal 72 hours, I watched my career and reputation assaulted online. But the weight of the federal investigation, the tapes, the bank records, and the community testimony made the allegations collapse under scrutiny. Pat's files had also revealed that the arson of my house wasn't a random act of vengeance. It was a step in a larger fraud. Scheme intended to clear properties for redevelopment and reap massive insurance rewards. That revelation shifted the case from petty HOA warfare to organized, long-running fraud and civil rights abuses. The feds stacked charges accordingly. RICO predicates, mail-and wire fraud, conspiracy, animal cruelty, and unlawful entry created an airtight net. In the end, Brin had made the classic mistake, attacking someone who knew the law's levers and could call in favors. She'd tried to bully a neighborhood into conformity and stole its funds while doing it. But she'd picked the wrong target. I rebuilt what the fire and the months of grief had tried to destroy, not out of spite, but to restore the safety and dignity Harold and I had loved. Operation Ashfall dismantled her schemes, exposed her crimes, and brought relief to the families she'd terrorized. This is the story of how a grieving judge turned a personal attack into a legal crusade. Not for revenge, exactly, but for justice. Brin's empire of petty tyranny and fraud collapsed under evidence, community courage, and the slow, relentless machinery of the law. And when the gavel finally fell on her misdeeds, it wasn't just my house that was spared. It was the neighborhood, the marginal voices she'd tried to silence, and the rule of law itself. By the time the agents closed her Tesla doors and read her rights, the neighborhood had gathered along the curb. People I'd seen bullied into silence now whispered to each other with disbelief. Walt Henderson crossed the street slowly, pipe in hand, eyes shining. "'Bout time," he said softly, voice rough with vindication. But even as Brin's silver manicure flashed in the sunlight against the handcuffs, I knew this wasn't over. People like her never go quietly. Not when their entire life has been built on deception, control, and the illusion of power. That illusion began to unravel the moment she was booked. The U.S. Attorney's Office held a press conference within 48 hours, confirming a 37-count indictment: wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, obstruction, animal cruelty, and racketeering. It hit every local station. HOA president arrested in $3.4 million fraud and arson scheme, the headlines screamed. My phone rang nonstop. Former defendants, reporters, old friends, even other judges calling in shock or congratulations. But victory felt strange, hollow almost. The house was still gone. Harold's roses scorched black. Gavl was recovering, but his eyes had that distant look, as if some part of him still heard the roar of the leaf blowers. And me? I was a judge without a home, sitting among half-burned memories and the smell of smoke that no amount of detergent could erase. Then came the retaliation. Brin's husband, Miles Sterling, didn't vanish quietly like his wife. He lawyered up, aggressively, filed motions, countersuits, allegations of defamation, claimed the investigation was a witch hunt orchestrated by a vindictive judge with a personal vendetta. He wasn't doing it for her. He was trying to protect himself, to cut a deal, to keep the FBI from following the money trail deeper into his offshore accounts. But I'd spent 2 decades watching guilty men bluff through desperation. I recognized the tremor in his voice, the nervous tapping of his fingers during the preliminary hearing. The Department of Justice wasn't fooled either. They found hidden accounts in the Cayman Islands tied to both his and Brin's shell corporations. Money laundered through fake neighborhood improvement projects, then funneled into private investment portfolios under aliases. It was sprawling, methodical, and older than Pinewood Estates itself. Pat Donnelly, retired FBI agent turned my guardian angel, uncovered an older file from Arizona linking Brin to 3 previous accidental property fires, all connected to the same insurance company and the same adjuster, who had since gone missing during an audit. The picture forming wasn't just a greedy HOA president gone rogue. It was a woman who'd spent years weaponizing bureaucracy and disaster. Pinewood was merely her latest stage. Meanwhile, the neighborhood began to heal. Families who had moved away returned for the first community meeting since Brin's arrest. I stood at the front of the crowded recreation hall, the smell of burnt coffee and fresh relief thick in the air. We voted unanimously to dissolve the HOA and petitioned the state for a receivership to manage funds transparently. For the first time in years, people spoke freely. The Rodriguez family shared how Brin had forged documents claiming their fence encroached on public property. Mrs. Morgan trembled as she recounted being fined for a memorial garden. A single mother, tears streaming down her cheeks, described how her child's sidewalk chalk was labeled graffiti. I took notes through it all. Every story, every falsified fine, every emotional scar she'd inflicted. The prosecutor's office would need these testimonies to establish the RICO pattern. Justice wasn't just my job anymore. It had become personal, communal. But the legal system moved slowly, and Brin was nothing if not resourceful. From her cell, she began writing letters, not to her lawyer, but to the press. Carefully crafted statements claiming innocence, framing herself as a victim of a corrupt judicial vendetta. She painted me as unstable, grief-driven, even implying I'd orchestrated my own house fire for attention. The tabloids ate it up. Fallen judge or avenging angel became clickbait fodder for weeks. It didn't last. The forensic report came back. Accelerant residue matching samples from Brin's garage. Security footage from a traffic cam caught her Tesla near my home the night of the fire, time-stamped minutes before the blaze began. Add that to the insurance fraud and financial evidence. She was trapped. The only question left was whether she'd try to take anyone else down with her. She did. Her husband flipped first. Offered testimony against her in exchange for leniency. Claimed she'd manipulated him, that he was merely following orders. The classic defense of the complicit coward. He turned over emails, her blueprints for restructuring Pinewood's property map, forged city zoning drafts, even correspondence with local contractors about future demolitions, post-fire. When I read those words, my hands trembled, not from fear but fury. She hadn't just wanted my house destroyed. She'd planned to erase an entire block of older homes, Harold's Roses, Walt's porch, the Rodriguez's garden, all of it. Gone for profit. The trial became national news. Federal court, Denver, packed gallery, cameras outside, protesters waving signs that read, "Justice for Pinewood and no one above the law." I took my seat not as a judge, but as a witness. The irony wasn't lost on me. After 2 decades presiding over justice, I was now the one testifying. The defense tried every trick in the book. Claimed emotional instability, selective memory, post-traumatic stress. They tried to discredit the FBI, the community, even Gavl's veterinary report. But the prosecution had evidence stacked higher than Brin's ego. Recordings, financial statements, surveillance logs. When they played the tape of her mocking me and admitting the payout was worth the trouble, even the jury flinched. Brin showed no remorse. She sat there in designer glasses and a tailored suit, smirking like the whole process bored her. But that mask cracked when Pat took the stand. Mrs. Sterling wasn't just harassing her neighbors, Pat testified calmly. She was conducting a calculated fraud operation across multiple states. Judge Blackwood was simply the one person she couldn't intimidate. The courtroom was silent. When the verdict came, it hit like thunder. Guilty on all 37 counts. Sentenced to 28 years without parole, federal time. Her husband got 12. Their assets were seized, the offshore accounts frozen, and the remaining HOA funds returned to residents. But closure isn't clean. I moved into a small mountain cabin after the trial. Nothing fancy, just quiet, surrounded by pine and wind. Gavl followed me from room to room like a little gray shadow, his limp almost gone. Some nights I'd sit by the window, bourbon in hand, staring into the forest and thinking about Harold, about how easily life can burn down, and how sometimes rebuilding means letting the ashes settle first. Sarah Morgan, the reporter who first aired the story, visited a few weeks later for a follow-up piece. She called it The Judge Who Burned Back. The episode went viral. Letters started pouring in, from people across the country dealing with abusive HOAs, corrupt boards, or predatory neighbors. My inbox turned into a confessional for the oppressed. So I did something unexpected. I retired from the bench. 30 years was enough. But I didn't vanish into quiet widowhood. I founded a nonprofit with Pat and Sarah, the Blackwood Initiative, offering legal guidance to homeowners harassed by corrupt associations and predatory developers. We started small, just phone consultations and pro bono cases. Within 6 months, we had volunteers from 5 states, and by the end of the year, we'd helped dissolve 12 abusive HOAs. The work filled the void Harold left. Each case was a battle, each victory a small resurrection. And every time a family got their home back, every time a bully like Brin got exposed, I felt that quiet hum of purpose again. One winter evening, months later, a letter arrived without a return address. The handwriting was sharp, familiar. Brin's. You think you won, but justice is temporary. The system protects people like me. You'll see. I folded it carefully, slid it into a file, and poured myself another bourbon. People like Brin always believe the system is their shield. They never understand. It's actually my weapon. When the sequel investigation began, tracing her co-conspirators across Arizona, Nevada, and Utah, I was ready. The web of deceit she'd spun was larger than anyone expected. Developers, insurance adjusters, even a city inspector, all tied to the same chain of fraudulent fires and false claims. The DOJ reopened the case as a multi-state criminal enterprise, and at its center, one woman who thought she could outplay the law, and one judge who refused to burn quietly. Now, every year on the anniversary of the fire, I visit the empty lot where my home once stood. The roses never came back, but the soil still smells faintly sweet when it rains. I leave one white bloom there, synthetic, indestructible, and whisper, "We won, Harold. Justice stands,